phone! Ah!
Hello, and Hero here, something of a virtual YouTuber myself. Sorry about the delay on the video. Sometimes depression really prevents you from doing things you like. Anyway, I had on hand many of the parts to create my first gaming PC from 2015. It's not quite one-to-one, but overall really close. The parts of the build that were really the same were the CPU and the case. The Raid Max horse isn't really a case to write home about, but it got the job done and had plenty of space to go with it. 21-year-old me was really bored and decided to paint the case a little bit. Anyway, onto the CPU, which is the original CPU I owned. I present to you the FX 4300, a 4-core CPU. Once again, I don't really have to fully explain why that's debated on, though it generally has okay single-thread performance compared to the rest of the FX lineup from AMD. And on to the basics. Launched October 2012 for AMD's AM3 Plus socket. The stock was 3.8 GHz and boosts up to 4. Like most AMD CPUs, this was also unlocked, so you could overclock it quite well. Even for the entry level, this CPU has a 95 TDP, so it was indeed what you call a hot boy. Though if you're not overclocking, I've had okay luck with a stock cooler. Now for a personal favorite GPU of mine. It's not exactly the same, but it's really close. I originally had the EVGA SC Plus version, and this is the EVGA SSC. It's clocked a little higher and has a longer PCB. I actually know where to find the original card, and sometimes it visits me actually a couple times a month. Anyway, if you want to learn more about this card, you could check out this video up there. Now for the basics. This entry-level Maxwell card was launched in August 2015. Its base clock is 1024 MHz and can boost up to 1188 MHz with a memory at 1653 MHz. The 950 was specifically aimed at 1080p gamers as well, built with MOBA games and other esports in mind. So this card only ever came with just 2 gigs of GDDR5 VRAM. Most versions of the 950 have a 90 watt TDP, but eventually a few came out with 75 watt versions, eliminating a need for a 6-pin power connector. So something a little different, I'll talk about the specs of this PC a little bit more. We already know there are the 4300 and the 950 in this machine. It's on an MSI 760 GM-P23 motherboard. The original motherboard is actually an MSI 760 GM-P34. The main difference is this motherboard actually has some SATA 3 ports and some USB 3 ports. The one that is currently in this machine has neither. Really shows how old this thing is. I did have 8 gigs of RAM in the OG machine, but it was single channel, and the current one is dual channel, still just 8 gigs of RAM. Both PSUs were Thermaltake's TR2 430 watt PSUs, but the old one was the newer style with a bigger fan, and this one is the smaller one, which kind of whines and has smaller intake and outtake fans, but it hasn't quite blown up so far, so it's fine. Also, this version of the 950 uses an 8-pin, and the PSU only has a 6-pin, so I'm using an adapter. Not the best idea, but not too much power is going through that thing right now. Alright, like always, we'll run through the synthetic benchmarks. For Cinebench R23, we have a multi-score of 1463 with a single of 487. Moving on to 3D Mark, Firestrike scores 5109 and Time Spy with 1953, and for those who want to know, PC Mark is 2561. Now let's get on to the gaming benchmarks. For Fortnite, I realized competitive settings aren't really needed unless I specifically need low settings, but since we have performance mode, it practically has replaced it overall. So I tested Overwatch in high settings, since that's how I mainly played back in the day, but medium overall was much smoother with an okay increase in FPS compared to high. For Resident Evil 4, the cutscenes play wonderfully, but gameplay there's much to be desired, usually playing around the 30 FPS and will dip into the 20s when a lot is going on. 900p instead of 1080p for Forza resulted in fewer problems overall and less CPU bandwidth issues. 1080p had them so often that every car stopped for a moment. 900p also resulted in the world disappearing way less than in 1080p. This PC served my needs back in 2015, and in an alternate universe could have still been my PC now. It does decently play games today, but with lots of compromises. For esports titles it gets by, as well as most indie titles, but will really fall short when it comes to AAA titles. This thing will chug if pushed too hard. Let me know down below if you've ever had any of these parts. Now to switch in FX 6100 and move everything into a new case and just give this thing to my brother. Like if you like, and dislike if you didn't like it, or just hate me. Set for more if you're masochistic. I'm Hero. See you next time.
I put the new 4Gs on the G. I trap until the blood